What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through the ultimate guide to the upcoming Game Week 9. So this ultimate guide is going to be slightly different to the normal ultimate guide videos, and the simple reason for that is that, as you guys know, we wildcarded in Game Week 8, and we have had some notable news. Spoiler alert, Lukaku is currently injured, so that's going to take up the majority of this ultimate guide. So what I have done is I've taken out the watch list. A little bit strange to do a watch list directly after a wildcard. So if I had to sum up this video in 2 words, it's going to be Lukaku and it's going to be captaincy. So those are the 2 topics we'll be covering in this specific video. So that's something you guys are interested in. Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So as I mentioned in the introduction, Romelu Lukaku did pick up an injury last night in their Champions League fixture against Malmo. Now Tuchel came out a couple of days ago and said that Lukaku was not only physically exhausted but also mentally exhausted, and then he goes and plays him the next day in the Champions League. It's a little bit of a strange one there. Don't really know why Lukaku was facing a Champions League side that Chelsea would have easily beaten even if Lukaku wasn't on the pitch, but I mean, he is the Chelsea manager for a reason. I'm only an FPL manager, so I can't really judge the decisions behind the scenes. But in terms of Lukaku, what's in front of us now as an FPL manager is that he's going to be probably missing Game Week 9 and maybe a couple more game weeks. Now, the first thing I want to give you guys an update on is that if you haven't decided who your replacement for Lukaku is going to be, this might be a Jamie Vardy, a Harry Kane. There are some options we also will talk about in the upcoming talking points at other price points. But with Lukaku and your replacements, I wouldn't be looking at the price rises happening tonight, because a notable transfer in, probably a Jamie Vardy, is rising in price. I don't really want that to affect your decision making. So don't check the price rises. I know I've pretty much just spoiled them for you, but there are some other players also rising and dropping in price, and I don't want the price rises to affect your guys' decision making. With Lukaku though, if you guys can get as much information as possible, I would do that. I would hold the transfers off from tonight and wait for that Chelsea press conference coming up tomorrow, and then maybe Tuchel will give us an update. There could be some miracle and Lukaku is back for Game Week 9, but I think that's probably the minimum amount of games that he'll be missing. But maybe tomorrow he will give us an update on how long Lukaku should be out for. Now, a lot of people over on Twitter are saying that the Lukaku injury, it was an ankle injury which he picked up, winning a penalty actually for Chelsea last night. And it does look quite similar to the Reece James ankle injury. And Reece James was out for about 6 weeks if I do recall. So maybe Lukaku, that's a similar expectation there, but different player, different injury, and we might see a shorter or longer kind of span or expectation for him to come back. But I think if Lukaku is going to be missing Norwich at home, which I'm pretty sure he will, I think he might be worth the transfer out. And the simple reason for that is that he comes in quite expensive, and you don't want to waste that budget on your bench when there's other options in and around that price point and cheaper that have some nice fixtures coming up that I think could outperform him or at least give you a gain of points. So who are those options to kind of look at? I'll be taking you guys through 4 options that I've come up with, all at different price points, so you guys can range from the most expensive strikers to the cheaper options that still provide some nice stats and also fixtures. Let me know in the comments down below before I talk about my options. Who are you guys replacing Lukaku for? There might be some of you that are actually keeping him on your bench just because those Chelsea fixtures look so good in these next couple. But I think that I would probably recommend taking him out. And if you guys do take him out, who are you bringing in? Let me know, as I said, in the comments down below. But going on to my 4 favorite options, my first option, and what I've actually done is, as you know, when I always do kind of a player comparison, I go over to Fantasy Football Fix and I look at their stats and projected points. So what I've done is I've sorted my 4 options according to projected points. And we're going to start off with the big hitter, Jamie Vardy, who's predicted to score the most points over the next 6 game weeks. So just keep that in mind. The fixtures and the projected points kind of correlate. And this is obviously from Fantasy Football Fix's algorithm. But Jamie Vardy is definitely the most popular transfer in for Romelu Lukaku. Definitely going to kind of boost his ownership up, which is already quite substantial in FPL at the current moment. And the reason for that is he comes in at 10.6 million, had a couple of price rises since we last covered him in an ultimate guide. And that's just because he's been on such good form. So 7 goals, 1 assist that Jamie Vardy has managed to produce this Premier League season. And those stats look quite good considering we only have played 8 game weeks. So basically a goal every single game, which might be quite hard to keep up with. But with these fixtures coming up, definitely not impossible. possible. I think the reason most people in the FPL community are currently off-put by Jamie Vardy is just because of that game week 9 fixture. Brentford away. Now Brentford have looked like quite a strong defensive side, so I'm expecting kind of Leicester and Jamie Vardy as a whole to probably struggle at Brentford, but the next upcoming fixtures don't look that bad. Yes, Arsenal, Leeds. I mean, Leeds is quite a good fixture on paper. Arsenal, I think Jamie Vardy has quite a good scoring record against him, and it's only around game week 12 where there's a tough fixture for Leicester where they face Chelsea. But this is a home fixture, and I would remind you guys that this is going to be after the international break, and historically Chelsea tend to struggle after international breaks. Maybe Jamie Vardy can even score in that one. Game week 12-13, no complaints from my side on paper, but I mean game week 13 against Southampton away could be a little bit of a tougher fixture than on paper, but I think you always have to back your stronger teams against Southampton, even though they've been quite defensively assured. 32.2 points predicted over the next 6 fixtures, which is quite respectable, and you will see how that compares to my other options, but as I said, definitely the highest rated projected point scorer over these next couple game weeks. I think right now Jamie Vardy is going to be my favorite option to go for. It's a little bit of a tough debate. You'll see my next option, Harry Kane, definitely has the fixtures in the medium term, but Jamie Vardy has, I guess, mediocre fixtures, but high form to back it up. Then going on to our next option, Harry Kane comes in at a price point of 12.1 million. So you guys might not actually be able to afford the English striker. And the main reason for that is that he is more expensive than Lukaku. So maybe if you have a couple of 0.1 millions lying around in your bank, you can afford this move. But if you can't, you might have to downgrade another department or take a hit. And I wouldn't really suggest that with Harry Kane. I think if you can't afford this in a straight swap, I probably wouldn't do it this game week. 29.8 points projected for the next 6 game weeks or so. And I mean, that is less than Jamie Vardy, but still pretty respectable. And the thing about Harry Kane that a lot of people are kind of putting up is that he does have some great fixtures in the medium term. And the reason why people are bringing that up is that in those specific game weeks when he has a good fixture, you're not really going to be captaining a Mo Salah. You might be wanting to captain a Harry Kane or your Spurs assets. So the next 3 fixtures on paper don't look that strong, but when you analyze these fixtures a little bit more, West Ham, Man United, and also Everton, these defenses are a little bit hit or miss sometimes, and I do think that I can see Harry Kane scoring in these. But the form is not on Harry Kane's side. He only has scored 1 goal in the last couple games, or at least this Premier League season, which isn't kind of the stats that we're used to from Harry Kane. Now, I think also what you have to take into account if you want to look at Harry Kane as your option is I probably wouldn't be doubling up on Son and Kane. So if you do prefer Son, I think you might stay away from Harry Kane just because you don't want to kind of cloud that transfer. And if you do prefer the South Korean, then I would probably go for that move instead. I personally understand why there has been a little bit of hype around Harry Kane. Yes, he is a differential. Yes, last season was one of the highest scorers in FPL, but I probably would like to see a little bit more out of Spurs and Harry Kane as a whole before I do commit to that price point. But I think between most people, Harry Kane or Jamie Vardy is going to be where their transfer in is going to be for Lukaku. And what I want to show you guys is just like a little bit of a stats comparison over this Premier League season. So I'm going to disappear right away just to give you guys as much kind of information as possible. And as the saying goes, a picture paints 1,000 words. So I decided to give you guys the form of these 2 players right on screen here so that you guys can pause it and let me know which option you probably would prefer. Now, yes, this is only taking the past into account. We don't really count for the future. The future game weeks might be better for Harry Kane, but I mean, just look at these stats. Yes, I think Jamie Vardy has played easier opposition, but Harry Kane's form is looking absolutely atrocious right now, and I don't really know if I want to be spending that much money on a player that I haven't really seen that much of. So yes, on the left there, kind of spoiled it when I spoke about these 2 players. Harry Kane with only 1 goal and 1 assist, whereas Jamie Vardy has 7 goals and 1 assist to boot. Yes, Jamie Vardy has played more minutes, but I guess that game week 1 fixture against Man City, I don't think Harry Kane would have scored in that one anyways, because it is quite a tough fixture. As you saw, Jamie Vardy also didn't score against them in game week 4. So please just take into account that I think Spurs have played tougher games. You can see Jamie Vardy has faced the likes of Norwich, Burnley, Crystal Palace. Those are fixtures definitely I would be considering Harry Kane to score on them. But I just think on current form, Jamie Vardy looks too strong to kind of ignore, and definitely think he should be in considerations as a Romelu Lukaku replacement. But now kind of going on to our next options, and they're going to come slightly cheaper than a Jamie Vardy or Harry Kane. The first one is going to be a Gabriel Jesus from Man City. Now, Gabriel Jesus, the thing you must know about him is that he had that international break frenzy with Brazil, came back late, didn't feature in game week 8, so he will be nicely rested for game week 9's fixture against Brighton away. Now, I'm expecting Gabriel Jesus to feature for Man City in that starting 11. At that right wing spot, we kind of seen an adjustment of his positioning. He usually played as a striker in the past couple seasons, but has transitioned to that right wing slot where he has had a couple of returns. So 8.6 million is relatively respectable when you're kind of accounting that Romelu Lukaku is so much more expensive. So you definitely will be able to afford the Brazilian right winger / forward. And in terms of projected points, hasn't really been projected to score that many, but that's just because the algorithm usually takes expected minutes into account. I don't think there's any Man City player, except for Kevin De Bruyne and Edison, that has a really high expected minutes over the long term. The thing with Man City assets for me right now is that I don't think their fixtures kind of justify the risk you do take from a rotation point of view. I mean, Brighton up next, which is quite a hard fixture. And then obviously in Game Week 10, Crystal Palace at home, absolutely splendid fixture to go by. But I just think the fixtures on paper for the medium term aren't as strong as I would have liked. And that kind of, as I said, doesn't quantify the risk of rotation for these Man City assets. But in terms of the forward department in FPL at the current moment, there's not too many options to kind of go by. So if you want to take a punt on a Man City attacker, I do think Gabriel Jesus is pretty nailed at that right wing slot. But then going on to our final option in the forward department, it's going to be Ivan Toney from Brentford at a cool 6.4 million. So basically half the price that Lukaku did come in at. And I do think he's been severely underlooked at his price point. And the reason for that is just check those fixtures from game week 10 to 12. Absolutely splendid. I mean, these fixtures on paper look like some of the best fixtures that you guys can get in FPL at the current moment. And that's why I think Toney could be quite an attractive option at his price point. Now, yes, there might not be that many other options to upgrade with that extra cash in the bank that you do have. But if you want to bring in a player like a De Bruyne, a Sadio Mane, maybe even keep that money for a Heung-min Son or Harry Kane, come when their fixtures do turn, this could easily be an option that you guys do look at. And the reason why I wanted to highlight him is that if you guys did watch my team selection a couple of days ago, I spoke about wanting to upgrade Adam Armstrong to Ivan Toney come next game week. And I might just move that transfer one game week forward because I do want Toney for that run from game week 10 to 12 as it looks simply outstanding, as I did mention. Now, in terms of projected points, 24.4 is not that high, but I mean, just compare the price point to his other options. And when you do look at the value, kind of points per million scored, that provides quite a good metric to measure him on. The thing about Toney as well is that he's nailed to play 90 minutes most game weeks for Brentford, and he is on penalties as well. Now, yes, there haven't been that many penalties in the Prem this season, but I do think that is an attribute that he does present that could be leaning you towards maybe going for him over one of these other options. So as I said, kind of being really underlooked, I think really underrated at the current moment, and I do expect him to pick up the form in terms of goals and assists over these nice upcoming games. But now what I wanted to do, because I know it's quite hard to sometimes compare these options when I'm looking at them page for page. So what I wanted to do is combine them all into one single talking point. And I went over to Fantasy Football Fix and used their comparison matrix, and I compared them over various stats. So the stats I did compare them on are going to be expected FPL points. Now I know this isn't really FPL points and it might be a little bit dodgy to compare expected kind of stats, but I do like the kind of expected stats because I think it gives us a nice little metric to measure these players on if we didn't watch the fixture. So I've gone for expected points here. I've also gone for expected goals, then normal goals, and I've also gone for shots on target, and then finally touches in the opposition box. So I think in terms of these forwards, these stats really kind of sum up that position as you really want to focus on the goal scoring ability and kind of the chances created or big chances that these players did have. In terms of the four options that I have selected, these are the four options that I've spoken about, but then you'll notice on the right hand side there, another option I haven't incorporated. And the reason why I've gone for Antonio from West Ham is that I think a lot of players are kind of thinking about taking Antonio out in either next game week or the upcoming game weeks. And I just wanted to show you guys here in terms of the stats, how good he actually has been this Premier League season. You also note that I have denoted the highest stats in each category with a little white star, and you'll see that Antonio, in basically all the stats apart from one, he is the leader out of these 5 assets. And that's quite incredible considering that he does come in quite cheaper than a Jamie Vardy and Harry Kane. So if you do own an Antonio, or if you don't have an Antonio, I would probably recommend maybe bringing him in or at least keeping him. What I also wanted to note is that I have sorted these according to per game played. You would have noted when I spoke about Harry Kane, Jamie Vardy, Harry Kane has played less minutes than him. So I thought it was a little bit unfair to kind of group these stats according to totals. And that's why I've gone for per game stats. I think this obviously will also favor Gabriel Jesus, as with Man City's Pep Roulette, not all of these attacking options do feature for Man City. So at least now you know if he does start and if he does play, what his kind of expectations are for stats. So I'm going to start off with the expected points here, and you can see per game played, Jamie Vardy is expected to score the highest points out of the options. Yes, I know Antonio is the highest out of all of them, but 5.4 isn't too shabby. And then also have Gabriel Jesus with a cool 5.1. Right now, Harry Kane has the worst expected points, even compared to Ivan Toney, who comes in literally almost half the price that the English striker does come in at. I then wanted to talk about expected goals and goals as a whole, because I think this gives us a nice little metric of comparing if these players are overperforming or underperforming their stats. And as you can see, Jamie Vardy overperforming his goals, but that's become kind of an expectation with him because he doesn't really abide by the stats. He always is an overperformer, and you can see that that's kind of true this Premier League season. Harry Kane is currently underperforming his stats, so maybe that's why in terms of the points he hasn't really scored that many, but 0.3 XG per game compared to 0.1 that he's managed to produce, which I think he will kind of improve over these upcoming games. Ivan Toney is also overperforming his stats, but I think with these nice fixtures coming up, these stats will kind of normalize, and I'm expecting quite a similar return from his XG and his goals. The final two options, Gabriel Jesus and Antonio, both are kind of normalized. They have the same XG as goals, which just shows that when these players do have a big chance, they usually do convert it. The second final stats I wanted to compare was going to be shots and shots on target. Now, shot on target is one of those metrics that's a little bit up in the air at the moment, causes quite a bit of debate, because I guess you can have shots out of the box that still do produce shots on target. But interestingly enough, it does show that Harry Kane is still getting a couple shots and shots on target, at least compared to Jamie Vardy, and also shows that Ivan Toney likes to get a couple of shots, but unfortunately is not that accurate, and he seems to dip off when you do consider the shots on target. Antonio yet again leading the way on shots and shots on target, which just shows what a great option he's going to be for these upcoming game weeks. But it does show here that Jamie Vardy is still getting a couple of chances, even though he does overperform the stats. He is still getting shots and shots on target, which hopefully will result in some goals in the upcoming game weeks. The final stat that I wanted to talk about is going to be touches in the opposition box, and these were a little bit surprising for me considering Harry Kane. So Harry Kane, he has slightly less than Ivan Toney, which is a little bit worrying for me because Harry Kane is always kind of an out-and-out striker, but with these Spurs current lineups, he sometimes does play a little bit deeper as almost a cam. And that's where Jamie Vardy comes in with a lot of touches in the box, which is quite pleasing to me, as I want my center forward to be in and around that box so that he gets as many shooting opportunities or goal opportunities as possible. But just compare these four options to an Antonio with nearly 8 touches in the box per game against oppositions. I mean, that's just simply outstanding, and again, just shows what good value for money he is. In terms of the kind of stats comparison and the stats matrix that we have come up with, I think it just proves how good Jamie Vardy has been this Premier League season, and obviously this shows that the stats are backing up his returns that he's got in FPL. But as I mentioned in the introduction, let me know who you guys are going for. Have you guys seen the stats debate and are currently leaning towards Jamie Vardy, or are you still going with Harry Kane, or maybe downgrading him to an Ivan Toney? And now going on to our captaincy debate as our final talking point, as we usually do. Now going over my 3 personal favorite options as of now. Hopefully there are no more injuries. As we know, maybe the press conferences tomorrow will give us some more insight into that. But I think there's pretty much 3 options that I'd be looking at, or at least 3 teams. The first one is going to be Mo Salah versus Man United. And the reason for this is that Mo Salah's form is simply sensational, probably better than Jamie Vardy's at the current moment. Now the only caveat with this is that he is playing United away, and these are Liverpool United games. Sometimes a little bit cagey, a little bit boring, especially because of United and the current form that they're on. I think they're going to park the bus quite a lot and look for the counter-attack. Now, Liverpool are always a little bit dodgy against a team that parks the bus and likes to counter-attack. So my expectations for Mo Salah aren't that high, and originally I wasn't going to captain him, but now with the Lukaku injury, I might be swayed to go for the Egyptian. But I definitely think that the ceiling is going to be a little bit higher on the other fixtures mentioned. That's going to be Man City and Chelsea. Now, Chelsea assets right now, I've gone for Kai Havertz, as from an attacking point of view, I always like to go for a Chelsea attacker over one of their defenders, or just more in general, an attacker over the defender. And that's why I think Kai Havertz, with Timo Werner and Lukaku out injured, he's basically guaranteed to start at that centre forward position. And I do really like Kai Havertz at that false 9, or just the 9 in general, as I think that's kind of his best position to play him at, and the returns in that position have actually been quite fruitful. And then you kind of just look at the fixture. Norwich at home doesn't get much better in the Premier League or FPL at the current moment than Norwich at home, so I'm expecting the ceiling to be a lot higher on a Kai Havertz than a Mo Salah. We could also look at the Chelsea defenders, as with that kind of defense, they rock solid at the back, basically a guaranteed clean sheet in my opinion. And then also you do opt for the attacking threat with maybe a Chua and Alonso, or maybe even a Reece James or an Azpilicueta. The only thing with the defense is kind of predicting who starts, and if we do get some more news prior to the deadline of maybe an Alonso starting, then I think he also is an equally as good captaincy option. And then finally, the Man City assets. I mean, what game week don't we look at Man City? Also with Chelsea, it's kind of the rotation that we do worry about. But I think if you do own a De Bruyne, maybe with Lukaku out injured, you've kind of shifted those funds from forward into the midfield department and got it to Kevin De Bruyne. I think perfectly fine captaincy option to go for. It is against Brighton, who have been quite strong defensively. So I think I might stick to going with the Kai Havertz or maybe a Mo Salah. If you guys are one of those safe managers, like to look at effective ownership, Mo Salah will definitely be captained by the majority of managers, I do believe. And that's why if you want to go for the safety option, just go with Mo Salah and hope these other players are kind of differential in their own respects. But finally, going on to the fantasy football fix algorithm, and what I always do on these ultimate guides is I go over to their predicted tool and I look for the 3 top options for that specific game week. So the 3 highest predicted point scorers for game week 9 are going to be Mo Salah, Antonio Rudiger, and then also Jamie Vardy. So Rudiger, a little bit of an interesting one here. I just think that because of his probably more guaranteed expected minutes, he's expected to get at least a clean sheet against Norwich at home, which I think is quite a good expectation. Now with Mo Salah, predicted to score 5.9 points, which is a little bit higher than Antonio's 5.5, but just shows you in terms of the high ceiling, the algorithm isn't really predicting Mo Salah to have that many points this game week. But comparing these 3 options, I mean, Mo Salah is still predicted to score the most points. You guys could still go from as a safety option, but then we also have Jamie Vardy on the end of it with a 5.4 predicted points. Now his fixture is against Brentford though, which I'm not really favouring that much, and I think if you do bring in Vardy and he gets an attacking return against Brentford, I think that's probably what I would take, and I'll consider myself pretty lucky. But let me know in the comments down below who you guys are captaining. I'm probably going to see the majority of Mo Salah comments, but there might be some surprises in and around there. But this is basically wrap up the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you're new and not subscribed yet. I won't be seeing you guys for a deadline stream tomorrow evening, unfortunately, but I'll be posting my updated team over my Twitter page at Dayvy FPL. But I'm going to be signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers. Bye.